Hey there, welcome to First Look. Thanks for being here this week as we move ahead into a new month and a whole other thing. So, um, thanks for being here. And, as I'm kind of thinking through and reviewing the week that has been, I have not yet, as of this recording, have not yet had a chance to watch the service for the 30th, although it is posted and it's there for you to participate in. So if you were looking forward to worshiping with us on the recording, it's there now. But I got a little understanding, I think, of the message and where Tyler was headed with it and how he tied it into the theme that we're ending. And so I'm looking forward to seeing that. And the week that I had at Highland went well. It's nice to be there. It's nice to kind of reminisce a bit. I mean, we participate with them so often now. It's not like, oh, I haven't seen these people in 5 years. Because I was just there the day before for the pet blessing, and which, if you didn't get a chance to go, was this really nice time, because even with the rain, back and forth with the rain, we were able to do the whole blessing piece, and people from the community came, and they were just really genuinely touched, I think, by the idea, and there were snow cones. So how could you not like a snow cone? So it was nice. It was quaint. It was heartfelt. It was really interesting to have the animal that was there who did like bomb detection and other dangerous substance detection in the airport, and for the police department, and that was really amazing to be able to do. So it was a nice time, and it was just a good weekend to do all of that. So today's brought to you by Seltzer Water, which has ruined me for pop, because now it's just too sweet and I can't do it anymore. It's like the end of an era. But this week we're kind of moving into something new, and not really not a series per se, but there's a small theme that kind of is going to run throughout. And speaking of small themes that run throughout, one of the themes that might be running throughout this recording is Liam being noisy, because that's what he does. He's doing some kind of like yoga video or something, and so of course that's wild and crazy. So why wouldn't he be? But so this series is going to start in a familiar place. The theme going through the next couple of sermons is going to start in a familiar place. And so we're jumping out of the prophets, and we're jumping out of the Psalms, and we're moving into the gospel for this week. And it's the feeding of the 5,000. And this one happens to be the one in Matthew. So as I try to recall whenever I do this, there's two things that I always think are important as I'm talking about this particular story. The first is that this is one of the very few stories about Jesus that ends up in all four Gospels. I think that's just... I try to look at what material we see in Scripture as a sign of what the Gospel writers assume is really important, an essential tenet. If you're going to know anything about Jesus, we all got together, this is what we think you really have to know. Because, it's not like it's a miracle of Jesus, but I don't think it's even the most miraculous miracle, right? I mean, it's fantastic and it's important, but the miracle part is not really what makes it a miracle. I mean, it's what it means, it's what it represents, which I think is far more powerful. So you have this feeding of the 5,000 story. So it's in all four Gospels. I mean, the birth narrative isn't in all four Gospels. So the fact that this one is just, it's important. And then the whenever I'm looking at that, then I try to think about which of the four Gospels am I in, and that kind of gives me a sense of maybe something to have in the back of my mind as I'm writing the sermon. So if I'm in Mark, Mark is usually thought of as the earliest gospel written, and written the closest to the time that Jesus actually lived. And so that kind of feels like it's like raw material. It's like that idea. I kind of have that in the back of my mind. If it's Matthew is geared mostly towards the Jewish audience. If it's Luke, then Luke is written by a Gentile author and includes a Gentile audience. And so that kind of inclusive piece of it, I try to recall. And then John, which is, John is doing his own thing, right? Like the other ones sort of line up. Matthew, Mark, and Luke kind of line up in terms of the story they're telling. John is going on his own kind of journey, and he's looking at Jesus from a more transcendent aspect, right? So if the other three look at sort of Jesus on the ground, this one is like more about or Jesus all around us, the eternal aspect of the person of Jesus. So since I'm in Matthew, then I'm keeping that audience in mind. And then the other thing that I'll be spending some time looking at, the kind of sub-theme here, or underlying theme, focuses on the fact that in this story, John the Baptist has just been killed. So we have Jesus, who's obviously very close to John. What is his response? And so I started thinking about that here over the last couple of months, because I've been sort of working through and thinking about and looking at a lot of people in my life who are kind of working through their own grief and trauma and, trying, recovery and that type of thing. And so I guess that was sort of on my mind whenever I started looking at the themes I wanted to explore at the different seasons. And, some of them are kind of going through it now. When I think about myself, I'm, there's certain traumatic or, grief-centered things in my life that I think a different stage of, in terms of kind of reflecting on it in my own life. It's maybe a little less raw, but it's something that I still, kind of revisit from time to time. Some people that are, like I said, in the middle of it right now. Some people who are, for some people it's relational. For some people it's more health or identity kind of, like who they are now kind of stuff. Some people are helping other people through things and they went through it, like they're helping a person through something after they have been through it themselves. Just a lot of different things like that in my little world. And, I also think about it a lot, and it is the most relevant, oftentimes because of just my developing relationship with you. A lot of you come to me with stories. Some of them are your own story, but some of them are like the stories of the people around you. So children or siblings or grandchildren or parents or, things that you are dealing with or struggling with or trying to figure out how to navigate, which is hard. And so I think, talking about it from the pulpit is always really relevant. And I think, like I said, the more I get to know you, I think that hopefully I'm choosing themes and I'm choosing things that I think can be helpful and be very specific. They can bring a little bit of who I am and a little bit of who you are and try to meet them in helpful places. So that's a big reason for the themes and the ideas that I try to put together in sermons. I'm thinking about who you all are and your stories as I try to craft these things. So this is Matthew 14. Again, it's good to remember that John the Baptist just died. And so now we get to the feeding of the 5,000. So without going too far into the theme, know that that's the what do we do now? Who are we now? How do we, I think I called the sermon, How Do We Get Out? Which to me was about taking those moments that can really drag us down, that can either get us into really terrible habits or addictions, which can get us into, depression or anxiety or experiences of PTSD, any and all of the things that we suffer from a mental and physical and spiritual health kind of way. What are the tools? What are the things that we lean on when we're trying to move out of those places, right? There's the initial lament, and then there's the how do I walk with this now? I'm never going to leave it behind, and that's always the key. I think one of the big things you realize is that as much as you try to leave something completely behind, some little piece of it, or some large piece of it, depending on what it is always going to be with you. And not to be afraid of that, or not to think of that as a weakness, but just as a reality that we live with. We move forward. We don't move on because we can't. Our history, our past is always going to be in some way, shape, or form a part of who we are. And we wouldn't be the people that we are, for good or for bad, without them. So it's coming to terms with that and trying to figure out what are healthy steps forward. So you're going to hear some of that, I think, on Sunday. But let me try to just focus for the next few minutes just on the passage itself, and then we can figure out where we go. So this is going to start in verse 13 and go into verse 21. Now when Jesus heard that John the Baptist had been killed, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them and cured their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." And Jesus said to them, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." And they replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all ate and were filled. And they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. And I think that thinking about the theme that I just mentioned, a lot of what I imagine I'll be talking about is just the reaction of Jesus, and trying to look at how is what he does for the people a response of just the circumstance. Then I started thinking about the other people. Just as I was reading, I was thinking about the other people that were there and how they fit into the story, or what their story is. because first, the disciples would have been affected by this also. They would have seen the death of John the Baptist as this catastrophic loss. And I don't know what all of them thought about John. I mean, I assume that some of them were also followers of John before Jesus called them to be disciples, or at least knew of John the Baptist, knew what he was up to. Because I think if you understand John, then I think understanding Jesus at least goes along with that. And so you would have seen the death of John, if nothing else, as this great loss for the cause, but also as a pretty great threat. I mean, if they got to John the Baptist as powerful and as popular as he was, then certainly, they could get to us, because it meant that the powers that be were paying attention and saw John as a threat. And if they saw John as a threat, then how could they not see Jesus as a threat? And so, if nothing else, that would have made, if I was, Peter or Andrew or someone, that would have made me anxious, and also like there was just one less flank. I mean, like just thinking about it from those terms, it would have just made you like all eyes were on you. There's no other co-conspirator, I guess you could say. I mean, it's just that would feel kind of scary. I don't even have a good comparison for that. It's just you would have felt weaker, I think. And it's interesting that maybe you even see a little bit of that in the passage itself, when it's getting late and they're in a deserted place and they're trying to be practical, and they're looking around at 5,000, 15,000 people, and they're like, Jesus, we don't, just send them away. We're exhausted. We clearly can't do anything for these people. Maybe they could just, go find food they weren't even really thinking like, oh, we need to, this was not a strong, powerful moment for the disciples. This felt like the end of a very, very long day, or maybe several days. And so it clearly wasn't in their minds to say, hey, Jesus, we need to do something for these people. This is our responsibility. And then, I think about the people themselves, those who were following Jesus. And many of them may have also been followers of John, and then as they hear John start to kind of proclaim, hey, you need to be following this person, that they kind of moved on. And I think that they could have felt a lot like Jesus had, or the disciples, I'm assuming the disciples felt, which was this kind of anxiety and fear, and what's going to happen next, and what does that mean for us. And, at the same time, Jesus had just healed the sick and had shown them compassion. And you would imagine that they were feeling pretty exhausted too, emotionally, physically. And, that's one of the things that grief and anxiety and that kind of thing can do, is that it kind of, you're not at your best. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's a part of the miracle that I think is most important to me, is that Jesus sees, he kind of does on some level. And I know there's more important things that you're probably thinking that he does here, but he kind of addresses this very basic thing. Like when we lose someone, or when we're going through it, when Liam was in the NICU for a few months when he was born, People can't do everything, but they can bring you something. They can make sure that you eat, and I think that's one of those things that the older you get, or the longer you do this church thing, you realize just how special that is. How the people in your life who bring the food. And the joke is, oh my gosh, so much food. There's so many casseroles, and there's so many whatever we'll never eat. We'll have to put it in the freezer. My husband bought another freezer because we had so much whatever. But I think that you are reminded of the blessing that it is to have people in your life that are willing to remember, they're going through it. They're going to have to eat. Which is a pretty special feeling, especially if you've gone through it, then you know what that's like. And I'll never try to make light of that, because that's true. So that's one piece of it for me. It's just that Jesus meeting that kind of need, and then of course there's the prayerful element of it. There's the fact that he doesn't just make it so, he makes it a worship service. He gives thanks, and he breaks the bread, and he performs his miracle, and people have what they need, and that sort of sacramental element to it, of course, is always a special thought. And then the last part, which I guess, this is just my musings for the next couple of minutes about what I see, but I guess everything is, but this is just me kind of thinking through something out loud, I guess, a little bit. I don't really ever know what to do practically with the fact that Jesus performs miracles. Sometimes I wonder, what am I supposed to think or feel? Like, what is it supposed to make me feel? Because if we're already talking about God in the flesh, and we're already talking about the resurrection, what other miraculous thing do I actually need? Like, do I need you to turn water into wine? Do I need you to walk on water if you're doing those things? And are those things, the walking on the water, and I mean, really, like, I'm just really just sort of sitting with it and thinking about it for a minute. If I think about the transfiguration, if I think about the incarnation, if I think about his death and resurrection, if I think about all those things, what do I do with the miracles that are, multiplying something into, I don't know. I mean, literally, what do I actually do with it? Like, what does it add to my experience of who God is? Like, do I need that experience? What does it teach me that I don't already know? Or maybe it's one of those things that if you didn't know the resurrection was coming, and you weren't there, or you didn't think about, like, the fact that, I mean, if I'm just looking at this from a practical perspective, from those people who were the followers of Jesus, you didn't know the resurrection was going to happen. You didn't know the transfiguration was going to happen. You didn't necessarily know that Jesus was God. Like, that concept wasn't at all fully formed in any way, shape, or form. He was a prophet. He was a guy. He was somebody from Nazareth. He was that person. I mean, we talk about the fact that the miracles were What was amazing about them is that Jesus wasn't charging anyone for them, right? And that we talk about that a little bit. But what do I learn? What do I learn about the experience of being with Jesus? Like, is it actually important? This is I'm asking you to think about this. I don't know that I have the answer. Let's say Jesus had just turned to the people and said, "Listen, I know you're tired, and I know you're hungry, and I know that this is a bleak day, and I'm feeling it too. But can we pull together and feed each other?" And everyone kind of figured out, "Hey, they've got a little bit of this, and they've got a little bit of this, and they figure out the miracle was that they shared everything, that they got it all together, and they had what they needed right there. The community had what they needed because they pulled together and because they were willing to be those who shared with each other. And that was the miracle. Is given the fact that we're looking at God in the flesh who was resurrected for all sin and all time, does the miracle part, the literalness of the miracle part matter? And if it does matter, why does it matter? Like, what does it tell me that those other things don't tell me? And maybe they're not for me, but they're so that they're proof to the people who are trying to figure out whether they can follow this person, risk their lives following this person. Like, is this person worth following? I mean, he just healed them. I mean, just healing the sick. Does it get any better than healing the sick? And the water and the wine is great, but like healing the sick, come on, there's nothing better than that. So what are things like this? What is the miracle of the miracle part of the feeding of the 5,000 do for my experience? What do I learn that I didn't know before? Or what does it solidify for me? Like, what does it plant for me? I don't know. Think about it, because I don't know the answer clearly, but always worth kind of trying to tease through. All right, that's what I got. I love doing this with you. I really do. I hope that it's meaningful. If there's ways that I can make it more meaningful, please let me know. I'm glad to be back with you this week. I'm grateful for the ways that you are involved in this community, and I'm looking forward to doing this next thing with you. So in the meantime, have a wonderful week. I hope that you're able to get the rest that you need and have little moments of joy where you need it. So let us know if there's anything we can do. Until then, I'll see you next time for another first look. Take care.